Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast and in partnership with Vertical Valor Magazine. The Hangar Z Podcast has extensively talked about the two primary challenges facing public safety aviation: politics and funding. We've dedicated considerable time to discussing the political aspects of this equation. In this two-part series, I discuss the challenges and solutions related to funding aircraft and mission equipment for law enforcement agencies with experts Ed Vanwinkle and D.C. Greer. The conversation delves into the intricacies of aircraft financing, the importance of education for new aviation leaders, and the creative solutions for acquiring necessary equipment. D.C. Greer is the Senior Vice President of Government Capital Corporation, a nationwide public finance company headquartered in Southlake, Texas. With over 30 years in public finance, his efforts have been focused largely in the public safety sector. D.C. served in the U.S. Army and is a graduate of Northwestern State University in this city that I'm going to attempt to say, Natchitoches, Louisiana. During our conversation, Ed Vanwinkle reflects on his over 20 years of service at the Gainesville Police Department in Florida, where he retired as a captain. His diverse roles included aviation, narcotics, detectives, patrol, SWAT, and training. He served as the narcotics unit commander, SWAT commander, and unit commander of the Joint Aviation Unit with the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. After retiring, Ed spent 9 years as the law enforcement sales manager at Airbus Helicopters and is now the vice president of law enforcement and OEM projects for CNC Technologies. He's also an active commercial helicopter pilot, flight instructor, and fixed-wing pilot. This conversation also delves into the advancements in aviation technology, particularly focusing on the integration of CNC life systems and the bidirectional flow of information that enhances operational efficiencies for aircrews. This is an important episode for anyone in public safety aviation, but especially for those in a position seeking funding solutions to purchase new aircraft or mission equipment. Thank you to our sponsors, Vertical Valor Magazine, CNC Technologies, and Vertical MRO.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z Podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
Hey, welcome to Hangar Z Podcast. I'm your host, John Gray, and I have a really quality conversation in store for today. Really excited to have the guests with us that we have today. We've talked a lot on the podcast about startups. We've talked about funding units. We've talked about a lot of the barriers to entry that exist for agencies that are looking to purchase new aircraft, either for a startup or just for the replacement cycle. We've talked about mission equipment, how important that is. We've talked about the political obstacles that prevent a lot of agencies from, again, a new unit startup or being able to get new aircraft. So with the political conversation, which we've touched on quite a bit, we've come up with a lot of solutions. What we haven't touched on, and something that we're going to talk about today, is how do you find solutions to purchase new aircraft, new mission equipment, vital equipment within the aircraft outside of just a straight check that a lot of agencies can't afford. So we have some experts with us today that have a lot of insight, knowledge, and experience in this. So we're going to focus on a lot of the funding side of the barrier. So again, we talk about the two barriers to entry being one, cost, and two, the political side. So we'll focus on the cost side today, on funding. So this is a lot of these conversations that revolve around money. Some folks, their eyes start to dry out and they go blank. That's why we brought in the folks that we have today to talk about this. So I want to introduce Ed Vanwinkle. And a lot of you know Ed. He worked with Airbus for quite a long time. Was in airborne law enforcement for, was it 20 years, Ed?
Well, no, it was actually 4 or 5 before I retired. And then I've further flown when I came back as a volunteer when I moved back to Florida. So about 10 years flying for law enforcement.
Okay. And Ed's currently with CNC. Ed was on the CNC podcast that we had in advance of Verticon, or it was HAI, the year that we had it in Beverly Hills, which is a lot of fun. But you were one of, I think, 7 panelists during that conversation. So it'll be fun to sit down and go through your background in a way that we didn't really get to last time. So I'm excited to dig through your background. You've got a lot of experience to share with our listeners. And then we've got DC Greer with us. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you, John.
Yeah. I mean,
good to be with you.
I loved a lot of the anecdotal conversations we've had already. You've got a lot of sayings, and I'm excited to hear those sayings come out. For the listeners, can you just tell us where you're from and what you currently do, DC?
Yeah, I live in Brookhaven, Mississippi, my wife and I, and been here for about 25, 26 years. Now, I'm a veteran, served from 68 to 70 in Fort Belvoir and in Korea for 13 months. And so I came back and finished my college degree, and after that got involved in financing. So I've been in different phases of financing over my life, but most of it's been about the last 30 years in public financing and a couple of premium markets, one law enforcement, the other one in public works.
Yeah, again, going back to the conversation surrounding money, it's a timely conversation. That's part of the reason why we decided to do it now. Given some of the headwinds that we have financially with a potentially down market, we thought it was important to talk about this right now. A lot of agencies, when times are good, have funds that are readily available to again, purchase new aircraft, replace old aircraft, new mission equipment. But that doesn't always happen when the economy goes bad. A lot of agencies, a lot of municipalities and county agencies, they're looking to reduce their budgetary spending. So how do we then purchase new aircraft, purchase new mission equipment, and all the things we need during those down cycles? So that's, again, what we're going to talk about a lot with DC and Ed. Ed, going back to you, again, we did have you on the podcast before, but can you give us a snapshot of your career, how you wound up in law enforcement, and then ultimately how you wound up with CNC where you are now?
John, I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, down below Tampa. When I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Florida up in Gainesville, which is north central Florida. Go Gators. While I was going to Florida, my aunt and uncle lived in Gainesville, and I would go to their house for dinner every Sunday night. My uncle was the director of the police academy. So even though I was working on a finance degree, because my dad's a real estate developer, and I was always for my whole life going to work for my dad and sell real estate and do that kind of thing, every Sunday night we're talking about, police work and going to the range and all that kind of stuff. And so all the minor courses I took while I was going to UF were mainly criminal justice classes. And I got to know a lot of cops who were working on degrees while they were police officers. And I went on a ride along. Interestingly enough, the guy I went on my first ride along with, his name is John Rouse, in a police car, also happened to be the first person I flew in a helicopter pilot with, because he was our agency's helicopter pilot in later years. So graduated from college, went straight into the police academy, and I worked for the Gainesville Police Department for 20 years. Had many different assignments: patrol, detectives, narcotics, S.W.A.T, aviation. I did quite a lot of training as well. And it was my experience in aviation, because we had a joint unit with our sheriff's office. The Gainesville Police Department had a joint unit with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. And when we had our 10-year anniversary, the guy who had started our unit, whose name was Larry Roberts, had left Gainesville, gone to a neighboring agency, and then went to what was then American Eurocopter. So at the time we're having this event, Larry's the vice president of sales for American Eurocopter. And not long after that event, he was looking for a law enforcement sales guy. And so I needed 6 months to be able to leave, because at our retirement, we could leave 20 years. So 20 and out, I left, moved my family to Texas. And that's when I started working for American Eurocopter, which of course now is Airbus Helicopters. So worked for them for almost 9 years, selling all over North America, United States, Canada. Also sold 6 aircraft to the Israeli National Police, which was awesome. Got to go to Israel twice.
That's cool.
Multiple trips to Marignan, France, also when I worked for them. And then I started with CNC almost exactly 8 years ago at Verticon. Started with them, and I'm the vice president of sales and OEM projects for them. So it's been I had an exciting police career. And then I also have had a 17 years, almost as long, not being a cop as I was, but been involved in aviation for over 20 years, and it's been very rewarding.
Yeah. First off, I want to thank you guys at CNC for supporting the podcast. You guys have been supporters since essentially day one. I really appreciate your guys' partnership. It's been fun to grow with you guys. You guys have grown like crazy. It's been fun to see you guys grow and become a household name in our industry. But going back to your childhood and your early adulthood, was there, it sounds like you identified you want to be a police officer fairly early on, but was there a desire as a young man to go into aviation, or did that kind of happen by almost happenstance?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because yes, I had decided when I was in 6th grade, I wanted to be an airline pilot. And so I bought this book that was about this thick called The Basic Guide to Flying, learned what I thought was everything about aviation. And then I convinced my dad that I needed to take flying lessons down at Venice Airport, which is just south of Sarasota. And so I'm 12 or 13 years old, 6th grader, and my dad's taking me out once a month, flying Cessna 150s, Piper Tomahawks. And I did that for about a year and a half until I fell on my bike, broke my arm, had to have surgery, and I got completely out of it and never got back into it until I got promoted to captain at the police department. And they put me in charge of the district the airport was in. And I said, if I can't learn to fly now, then I'm not going to. I ended up getting I paid for all my ratings up through instrument instructor. And so because my full-time job was not, assigned to the aviation unit. And then I just started flying like crazy after that. But yeah, it started when I was a kid and then got re-energized when I had an opportunity to start doing some flying again.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think most of us, I feel like at least, have an early passion for aviation and want to pursue that. As a kid, I remember playing with the little toy jets and, wanting from an early age to be a part of it. And all the movies and all the things in pop culture that push you towards those things is really cool. Do you remember from the pop culture side of things, aside from your own internal interest, were there things that kind of spurred that interest for aviation?
Nothing particular. I just was really interested in flying. And whenever we would go to an airport, of course, you're standing by the fence, looking up, watching the planes land. And we live pretty close to Venice Airport. So if we ever went down there, they're landing right over the beach into the airport. And so, you're looking up, watching these small and sometimes bigger planes or helicopters land. And interestingly enough, going full circle, CMC just delivered the completion for Sarasota County Sheriff's Office on their new 429. So it only took me 17 years to sell my home agency something because they didn't want to buy, the plastic French helicopters when I worked at Airbus because they're diehard Bell guys. So, but they bought a new 429 and I was able to sell them a completion. So that was a great thing.
That's cool. DC, for you, going back to your childhood and then later your military time, any interest for aviation, and if so, where did that take you?
Yeah, I had down in Morgan City, Louisiana. I took when I was 17 years old, took flight instruction in a Ronca tail dragger, and the instructor, I think I scared him to death. So after a while, he said, "You're not really cut out for this." So that's that was my introduction to aircraft, and the lessons were $7.95 an hour, $7.95 an hour. And I said, "Well, I'm on the path to being in the skies," and he didn't think so. But as far as aviation, it really came about when Ed and I met many more years ago than we probably want to admit. And I began going to the aviation conferences and being involved in that. It was really intriguing, and it just kind of hit a spark as what he wanted to do, because I wanted to fly, but it just didn't pan out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did the two of you meet? Was that when Ed was with Airbus?
Airbus. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as the conferences go, what was your involvement through? It was ALEA, I believe, back in the day, right? Stay ahead of the mission with Vertical Valor Magazine, the only publication dedicated exclusively to the military and public safety sectors of the rotorcraft industry. The Valor team travels around the globe to bring you stories from the rotorcraft industry's first responders, with a special focus on the knowledge and technology that furthers their missions. Learn more at verticalmag.com/valor.
Yeah, it was meeting with vendors and also with agencies and sharing with them the financing that was available for either aircraft or mission equipment. And then when Ed was at Airbus, we had a joint venture together to promote the financing. It saw the need, and so we had several meetings, and so we promoted the financing on a larger scale, especially with the Airbus within the Airbus community.
One of the challenges, John, was that unlike Textron, Bell, Cessna, Beechcraft, they have their own financing arm. Mm-hmm. And so the Bell sales folks are able to offer financing, which may not be the same as what DC offers, but Airbus didn't have that. They did have some European bank partners, but that was more for very large commercial deals. It wasn't tailored to a smaller law enforcement operator. So that's what really got me interested when DC started telling me what they do and how they do it. And it's not that it's complicated, but he made it sound so simple, which getting it going really is. Once you can explain it to the higher ups. And of course, as you know, at all these conferences, it's, unit bosses, pilots, tactical flight officers who are there. And if you can't explain it to them so they can pass it up the chain, it's never going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so DC had, typically his quotes that he will eventually provide are pretty much one sheet, and it tells you what the terms are. It's not the legal documentation that goes with it. And I know we'll jump ahead to that later, but it was so simple, both for me as a sales guy to get a quote, to be able to provide that as supporting documentation, because, as a salesperson, you're trying to remove objections. And if the objection is, well, we can't get in this day and age $7 million to buy a new H-125 or 407, then what are our options? Or if we want to replace the mission suite, what are our options? Well, the options are to come up with either some grants or to come up with a way to creatively finance it. And so that's how our connection started. And we did several decent deals together over the years I was at Airbus.
You did. Yeah, cool. It's a lot of it. You're right, Ann. It's a lot of education, because whenever they're used to getting maybe some company financing or grants, they don't explore any other avenues if that meets the bill, if that fits their need. So it is kind of involved into a couple of points of education. One is to the vendors that sell to the agents, is to show them the value of financing and how it can enhance their sales opportunities. And then for the agency, it's educating that point person to equip him to go up the line. Like Ed said, there are other decision makers, but, if it can't be, wholly simplistic, and it really is in the beginning, it's not rocket science. It's to show them the value of it. And the whole purpose in the education is to get their mindset from we can't afford it to, well, maybe this will work and maybe we can.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of folks kind of stall in their proposals for new units.
Yeah.
Because they go, well, we don't apparently have a budget for this, and it seems like it's a dead dream. But there's a lot of other potential avenues to get the aircraft than just, said agency writing a blank check for the aircraft and all the things that go with that.
And the other thing about it is that whenever they say, we can't afford it, it's not in our budget, what they're typically saying is it's not in our budget to pay cash. But what they're not saying, because most of them don't really know, is what solutions, what structures are out there that would allow me to pay that over time. It's no different in concept like buying a car. What do you do? They say, what's your payment? Let's fit that payment into the budget. So when you pay it back over time and you own that vehicle. It's the same thing with the municipal financing, whether it's an aircraft or whether it's mission equipment. You own that at the end, which takes advantage of the tax exempt financing, which makes it a lot of times more economically feasible.
Yeah, I think when you think about not just the new unit service, but when you think about the new aircraft, the replacement cycle that goes with that, not many agencies can afford to have an intact replacement fund that can cycle through a 10-year replacement plan like we had at Ontario, which was really cool. I loved having that. But again, it comes down to money, and not many agencies have the ability to dedicate the money required, like you said, to write a check with cash that exists today for that replacement fund. So excited to get into that. Want to transition just briefly, Ed, back to you and talk about leadership, because we do talk about a lot. We ask a lot of new leaders that come in aviation programs. We talk about how a lot of those new leaders that come in have been promoted and have probably never spent a ton of time in aviation, and then they show up and they're being tasked with, coming up with a purchase request for a new helicopter. Like, how do you do that? Being that you found yourself into aviation and then ultimately leadership within aviation, what advice do you have for those folks that are like, congratulations, you're promoted. Now here you go, you buy this new aircraft.
It's time for your Heli Life giveaway buzzword. Listen up and remember this word because you'll need it to enter for a chance to win exclusive Heli Life gear. Ready? This episode's buzzword is valor. Visit contest.verticalhelicasts.com to enter the buzzword.
What I like to say when they get promoted and transferred in is you really have to be a sponge. And the first thing you need to do is go to the unit manager's course that the Airborne Public Safety Association offers, because there are so many things you don't know. Unlike all other aspects of law enforcement, whether it's patrol, narcotics, detectives, canine, you pick it. Even if you haven't been assigned to it, you've used that tool and you generally would be able to manage a unit of those folks, even if you hadn't done it without a ton of extra training. But aviation is an entire career and discipline of its own. And it also happens to be probably the most expensive line item on the agency's budget.
Right.
And over my career in Gainesville, I had both the pleasure and challenge of being in charge of narcotics, S.W.A.T, and aviation. And those are very expensive units when it comes to equipment and, of course, personnel as well. So when it comes to, procuring aircraft or mission equipment, there's really three things that have to exist for a new unit boss to be able to do it. The first is there has to be an identified requirement for this equipment. And I don't mean that pilots and TFOs say, hey, we need a new thermal imager or we need a new helicopter or airplane. What that means is the agency has accepted that this is a priority that they're going to pursue. So there's the requirement first. Second is the funding source. How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to pay for it out of this year's operating budget? Are we going to plan 3 years ahead and put it in the capital budget, which many agencies will do once they identify the need? Do we pursue grants? And a lot of agencies, even though there have been aircraft purchased with grants, typically that's more for mission equipment. And those are done when you talk about the politics of it. Grants are really a regional priority, especially the way federal grants are handed out. So you can't just say, yes, we want a helicopter, because then all four agencies around you will probably want one and no one's going to get one. And then the last thing is the purchasing method. How are you going to buy it? Do you have a fleet of Bell products, MD products, Airbus products, and you're just going to sole source it? Are you going to go to bid because you're getting a different model? Are you changing missions? Like maybe you want to have a twin engine to do search and rescue. So you have to have first the requirement, second the funding, then the purchase method. The main thing we're talking about here is coming up with the funding. One thing that using the municipal lease financing to do this is that it offers an option that most procurement people are not familiar with. Now, that being said, several times I presented one of DC and Government Capital's proposals to a customer. There was a Florida agency I did that for, and they said, oh, well, we work with SunTrust Bank and they can offer this same type of financing. And because the Florida Sheriff's Association negotiated a lower rate than DC had at the time, they went that way. And that was okay for all of us because, look, the agency opened their eyes to an option they had. I think I also explained when we were prepping for this podcast, I had two different agencies, the city of San Antonio and the city of Baltimore. They went to buy 3 or more aircraft, and they used what they call a master lease. The agency would decide every year, we're going to lease 30, 50, $70 million, and it will fund various projects. And so they rolled their aircraft under those leases. So those were projects that we didn't get to use government capital for, but the conversation took it directly to something that the finance people said, hey, we won't use that because we already have this in place. So I think that unit bosses have to become educated on how these potential funding sources can work to their benefit, because you could be using a combination. You may lease the aircraft, finance the aircraft, you may use grant funding to buy the mission equipment, and then you might use operating funds to pay for training or for mechanics or whatever it is. So there's a lot of different ways. But circling back to your original question, what's my advice to unit managers? You've got to learn the lay of the land, how aviation works. You've got to talk to people who've done it. I love to say the homework's already been done. This has been done over and over and over by agencies. The aircraft have been sold. The aircraft have been financed. DC has a long list of examples of customers that have purchased single engine, twin engine airplanes, all kinds of aircraft. So you don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel. You just have to talk to people, which is, like I said, if you start with the absolute unit managers class, you will meet folks in the same shoes, and the people teaching the class have done all the work before. And that's one of the things that I teach at the unit managers class annually is how to buy aircraft and mission equipment.
Yeah, there's so many options. It's almost dizzying, based on what you guys are saying. And I think of even the person who was in the program and promoted up, you've probably never been exposed to what a purchase process is like for the aircraft. So
Exactly.
going to that unit manager's course is essential, at least to come up with some understanding as to what options are available, how you do this thing. So interesting to hear that. Again, interesting to hear that it doesn't have to be here's a check from our annual operating budget to purchase this one thing. There's other options for that. Ed, going back again to your early career, I'd like to talk about the field work, and it might involve aviation too, but I think a lot of the times the funny things we see happen outside of aviation because of the shenanigans that are happening with some of the customers we deal with on the ground. So thinking back over the course of your career and the things that you saw that were funny, what's one thing that kind of stands out as a funny incident that you were a part of?
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
There's so many, I wish I would have decided on day one to start taking notes, because I'd be making money on a book tour from all the things that I saw or did. To me, the funniest thing, and it's more anecdotal about the whole situation, I'm this, middle class, upper middle class college graduate becoming a cop in a town that I lived in for 4 years. And the first month of my career, I'm on midnight shift in parts of Gainesville, Florida that I had no idea existed. And I'm trying to communicate with folks in the projects and other areas that I'd never been to. And we didn't speak the same language. And so just trying to understand what's going on and how people got in these situations, because you realize early on, if someone calls you to their house, no matter what the neighborhood is, they're having probably the worst day of their year, right?
Right.
And trying to figure out how to get them through it, and also get the police through it without getting in a fight or getting, anyone getting their butt kicked in the process. But to me, just me being this young guy who I thought I had it all figured out of the academy, and then you realize, okay, it's just not that easy. One of the first felony stops I was on, we stopped a stolen vehicle in one of the worst areas of town. My training officer, I was his first trainee, and he pulls up right next to one of our canine officers who did not remember that the guy I was riding with had a rider. And his dog that he's getting out to send up to the car, his name is Thor. And it was probably one of the biggest German Shepherds I'd ever seen. And as he's letting Thor out and he just clipped the lead onto his collar, Thor launches toward me because I'm just the closest piece of meat. And he was just that kind of dog that's going to tear up whatever's near him. And at the last second, the handler's name was Steve Baker. Steve yanks back the leash. Literally, the dog's feet come out from under him as he's about to bite me in the leg. And so that's when I learned I need to pay a little bit better attention to my surroundings when dogs are coming out. Because, most agencies have had unintentional bites of officers, either chasing suspects or whatever else. So But those are a couple of examples anyway.
Yeah, that situational awareness lesson is great to learn early on. I think coming from a rural community, a mountain town in Southern California, and then going to work in San Diego and later Ontario, I had a lot of lessons to learn myself about, what urban life is like. And I was in a foreign world for all intents and purposes. So it was interesting to transplant yourself from one community to the next. But going back to the logs, I talked to a lot of people that say, I wish I would have written this stuff down, because it is so funny. But over time, all the details fade away that make it funny, right? And you're trying to remember why exactly it is funny, and you're like, well, I don't know, but it was pretty funny back in the day. So for DC, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a minute.
Okay.
Going back to your military time, I know there's a lot of shenanigans that take place, in training and in the barracks and just that life. It's a lot of fun. You're a young man with a lot of other young men with sometimes too much time on your hands. So when you think back to your time there, was there some shenanigans that you were a part of that you're willing to tell us about?
Oh yeah. Can you censor something? I never. We were on first overnight in basic training in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we had this preacher that was in there, and he didn't really wonder what he was doing in the Army. So we went to sleep that night, and he snored real loud. So we and it was on a hill where there's a lot of pine straw. So once he was sound asleep, we took him by the feet and drug him down to the bottom of the hill on the pine straw, and that didn't set too well. We paid for that dearly. Everything got out. But military was just a super experience. I wouldn't give anything for not serving our country. That's a blessing to be able to do that. And I had a good time at Fort Belvoir, which is 40 minutes opportunity to take advantage of some of the nation's capital. That was it's just a great experience. It really was. Korea was kind of tough, but it was. I wouldn't give any. I'd go do it again if I could. So
yeah. Well, thank you for your service and again for joining us to talk about a lot of these options that are foreign to a lot of the listeners. Can you again just go over what your current role is with the company you're with and what you guys primarily do within your company?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say about that, Ed was talking about in the ALEA. I never will forget it was funny, but it was just always you look forward to it. Is that I think it was toward the end of the ALEA conference, they gave out the award, and people would send in. What I'm talking about. They'd give videos, and they would film of actual scenes they were on, and the helicopter would had the camera, it had all the mission equipment, so you really get to see what that looks like. And I saw some things then that kind of really made me say, well, you know what? If I could finance this, I could help somebody save an officer's life. Yeah. Because one of the instances they had the camera and the agents were on the side of a building, and they did not know unless it had been to that helicopter radioing down to save a life. So that really kind of got me ingrained. But the most rewarding thing, one of the funniest things, that whenever they made the announcement, and then the dog was really important, as you know, on those videos. And I always look forward to that ending session, because when the dog was let out of the car, he goes over there and he just gnaws on somebody, and the whole place just erupts. Go dog. And that was just. But those things are so well trained. But to see that in action, and to see the value of that dog that's probably saved lives, because they identified him and he took them down. But that's one of my highlights always of ALEA, is to see that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the FLIR Vision Awards, and those are always a blast. Every time
absolutely.
you go, there's 1,000 at least, it seems, folks in there, and like you're saying, everyone's cheering for all the apprehensions that are made, and
absolutely,
it's definitely a highlight of the show. Brian Splain, he's a mastermind behind a lot of all the videos that they do, and I think my favorite one is the Captain FLIR video that he recorded with LAPD, and Jack Shanley was a part of that. Deb was a part of that. She was a previous guest. She actually, I think, is the one that took Captain Fleer on a ride along during that video. So I think there's rumor that Captain Fleer might make an appearance this year at the show. We'll see if that happens. So I hope so. But again, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for all you're doing for our industry. When you think about, each individual aircraft that is bought and how many apprehensions go into that one aircraft, it's kind of amazing to think, X amount of bad guys have been caught by this and X amount of good people have been found by that aircraft as well. We don't think about that very often, but it's pretty neat that you can look at it in that way. You talk about saving lives, DC, and that's 100% of what's happening. Ed, going back to you, this is turn into a bit of the story hour, but I love these stories because they highlight the good parts of our careers that are so fun to think about. A lot of that circles back to things that have been really impactful over the course of our careers. We see the good, bad, and ugly of the communities that we serve during the course of our career. But a lot of those, even though they're bad, they're really impactful. So when you think over the course of your career, Ed, what's a mission or incident that you were part of, whether it was in aviation or in the field, that was really impactful that you'd be willing to go over for us?
Well, I will tell you, it's the incident that ended up starting our aviation unit many years later. But in the early 90s, a guy named Danny Rawlings killed 5 students in Gainesville, Florida. He was a serial killer. And I was a relatively new police officer. My lieutenant had sent me to evidence technician school, which was a shift responsibility, not forensics. This was for, more complicated burglaries, death investigations. You're taking fingerprints, photographs. So I literally just finished this school, and I'm working evening shift, which at the time for us was 3:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. And as soon as I hit the road, we get a call that there's 2 dead bodies. So in my head, this is, it could have been a murder-suicide, but more likely, who knows what it is. But I wasn't thinking, that this was some sort of major event. So I basically jumped the call, go down there. Well, one of my training officers was the one who went into the apartment where the two female college students were. And, this guy had both raped and killed both of the girls, also done some, quite a bit of injury to them, taken some parts with him. And I knew that I had just stood in a place where the devil himself had been. It was that kind of a scene. And that was the first scene of what ended up being 3. He killed the first 2, then he killed a single girl who was actually working in the communications for the sheriff's office, and then killed 2 others, one of which was a guy who was bigger than me. And that's when everybody in town got scared. And this happened over a period of a few days, and then he ended up getting arrested for a robbery in a city south of us, and they started connecting the dots, and then he was identified as the killer. But that incident as a new police officer, much different than going to traffic crashes or, chasing dopers or, writing burglary reports. It was of national importance. It was and this guy had come from Shreveport, Louisiana, and it turned out right before he was executed for the crimes in Gainesville, he ended up confessing to a couple murders he had done in Shreveport, which were very similar to these.
Wow.
And so being involved in a case like that was significant. But, fast forward to, after my retirement, and I'm working at Airbus Helicopters, a guy who ended up being our director of sales for a year or 2. His name was Rich Gross. Rich had been with Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, and his agency had sent aircraft up to Gainesville because we were searching the woods because we knew that this guy was either homeless or a drifter or whatever. And so we had, city and county and state cops on the ground. We had helicopters in the air as we're going through the woods. Even we had people in recruit classes where we're using them just to look for anything that could be a shred of evidence. And it was bringing in these aircraft for that case that ended up resulting in us forming our joint aviation unit.
Wow.
It took and that's back when the feds started to hand out aircraft in the mid 90s. and the city got a Hughes OH-6 and the county got two OH-58s. And then that's still, we don't have the OH-6 anymore, but that's still what the unit's made up of. So that was a very impactful event that ended up, unbeknownst to me, influencing my future in my career at the police department. And then what I've been doing after retirement for the last 17 years.
Wow. Yeah, those kind of incidents are super traumatic. And you talk about mental health and the impact that it has on somebody over the course of their career, especially when that happens to somebody early on in their career. But you said something that resonated with me, and I hadn't thought about it in the way that you described it. You described standing in a scene that the devil himself had stood in. That's probably a variant of what you said, and how many times have we been in a situation where you have that kind of that feeling, because of the grotesqueness of what you've just seen, what you just witnessed. That's a really interesting way to put that. So, wow. Thanks for sharing that. Going forward, obviously that was what began to put the wheels in motion for your aviation unit that came later on. Can you give us a thumbnail, picture of what your aviation program ultimately became and where it's at today? If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel at vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. From the latest podcast episodes to conference updates, and even epic photography, Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry.
It developed quite well. We always had a small unit. It's nothing on the scale of many of the West Coast or even other units in the Southeast. We had 3 aircraft. We had the sheriff's office had a full-time crew. The police department had a full-time crew, and we shared a hangar and a mechanic. And so basically, depending upon that, this ebbed and flowed, but generally it turned into 12-hour coverage 7 days a week, which was primarily from, late afternoon into the early morning hours. That's kind of how it went. And it went really well until COVID came and the city's budget got tight. There was a training accident on the city's aircraft. It was a contractor who was flying that we were doing some MVG training, and the pilot that was flying with him, he was being demonstrated some full touchdown autos, and the OH-58 ended up getting into a pylon whirl, and it just basically shook the aircraft apart. Wow. And so instead of repairing the aircraft, the city decided to take the insurance money, and they got out of the aviation business. So the sheriff's office now they have 3 aircraft still and 1 full-time crew, but it's more challenging for them to staff. I was a volunteer for them for 6 years up until last July, and then I moved out of Gainesville, and so I just wasn't able to stay with them. But Richard Bray, who's the president of APSA, was the chief pilot the entire time I was there, both when I worked for the police department and then when I came back after retiring and working for Airbus and CNC, when I moved back to Florida. He does a great job as president of APSA, but he was a fantastic chief pilot and has trained countless guys who've moved on to many other jobs and moved them through a lot of different ratings. So, but the Alachua County Sheriff's Office still has an aviation unit in North Central Florida. And the fact that they just got a brand new chief pilot, they're about to get a new mechanic too. So
that's cool.
Faces are changing, but they're still operational.
It's interesting when you talk about being a small unit. It's like Ontario, in that you have a small unit, but a lot of the folks that are, I'll call them alumni of your agency, have gone on to impact our community in a big way. Yourself, Richard Bray, our friend and co-host Brian Smith. How did you meet Brian?
Well, I hired Brian for his first law enforcement pilot job in Gainesville. Brian was he worked for the city of Atlanta, and he literally sent out like 50 letters to multiple different agencies. My name's Brian Smith. I'm an officer for Atlanta. He had his commercial helicopter rating, but he hadn't had the opportunity to fly for the city of Atlanta. It didn't look like a position was going to open. So we had a guy who was the guy that I both had my first police ride along with and my first helicopter flight with. John Rouse was getting ready to retire. We knew 6 or 8 months in advance. So we hired Brian on early, even though he didn't have as much time when we hired him. We knew we'd be able to train him up and he'd be able to build his hours while he was flying with John. And so Brian came and worked for us. And after a few years of him working for the city is when I retired, moved on to American Eurocopter. And then since then, he went and worked for a few other agencies, became the safety program manager for Airborne Public Safety Association. And I mean, that was a solid 10 years of awesome achievement and frankly, a huge benefit to the organization.
Absolutely.
He's done a lot for the airborne law enforcement group.
Yeah, for the organization itself and for the broader community, not just here in the U.S. but internationally. I think Brian is done things that have talked about saving lives, saved a ton of lives through his best practice safety courses and all the things he's done there. Always thankful to call Brian a friend and happy to talk to him any chance I get. So
he's definitely a shining star in our industry.
Yeah, cool that you got to work with him. And again, going back to your agency, it's neat that so many people from your agency have gone on to impact the community in the way that they have. DC, I'm going to shift gears again back to you. So you talked about how you met Ed and then going to APSA or ALDA at the time. Can you talk about government capital and its role kind of within our community? What exactly it is that you guys do, and are you guys dedicated to public safety aviation, or do you have a broader mission than just aviation itself?
Yeah, government capital is a nationwide public finance company. And our sole focus is on political subdivisions in the U.S., whether it be public works, cities, counties, state governments, law enforcement agencies, fire district, anything to do with a public entity, a political subdivision. So that is our core and only business. And the reason for the success is that as doing business all over the U.S., you have to be aware of states' borrowing authority. Every state has a borrowing authority for an agency to purchase on a tax-exempt lease purchase, which means they will always own whatever they're purchasing it once the payments have been made. So we have a 98.6% approval rating of getting things done. And a lot of times that goes past just the initial one-pager financing proposal, but it's a good place to start because that proposal is etched in Jell-O. It's very manageable. But when you can get I need an aircraft for $7 million or a Searchlight for $600,000, and you give them options as for starters, it gets down to the most important thing on there is the rate is important, the cost is important, but the most important thing on that proposal is the payment, because if we can't find a range of where the payment needs to be, then nobody's going to do anything. We have to fit it within the budget. So we're very good listeners, not just to say, here it is, here's what it is, and here's how much it costs. You have to initially dig a little bit deeper than that to find out where that payment is. Once you can identify a payment range, then you can back into the structure that would potentially best fit that. But we do an extremely good job, very successful. We've done over $6.5 billion in financing since 1992, over 11,000 fundings. So in order to do that, it's more than just doing a one-page financing proposal, even though that's important, because not that initial offering of a proposal sometimes does not fit a lot of agencies, because and that's the reason that we explore further is to let's have our cup of coffee conversation. Tell me what you want to do. Tell me when your budget year is. Sometimes you have to do a staggered payment. You have one payment for 5 years, and then all of a sudden they have another financing that pays off. So that's a lateral move to catch the last part of the payments, which will be accelerated. So you really have to evaluate and analyze the budget to make sure that they have the means down the road to pay for it as well. And that's the fun part in developing a relationship, developing the trust, sending them information, and like Ed said, we have experience in the aviation. It is a very, unlike fire and unlike public works, it is such a specific funding, because not all, whoever does municipal funding, not all of them will even tackle an aircraft, because they don't understand the process and who's involved. What do you do with the FAA? Whose responsibility is it? Because we have experience, we can step them through that and get them at a comfort level that, hey, this is my first flight, and I can step you and hold your hand through this process.
We've talked about, or you guys have brought the term tax-free. Did you call it tax-free government lease,
No,
or just
tax-exempt?
Tax-exempt lease. Can you give us the thumbnail of what that means for folks that are listening? Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers. If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel, @vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. From the latest podcast episodes to conference updates, and even epic photography, Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry. Stay ahead of the mission with Vertical Valor Magazine, the only publication dedicated exclusively to the military and public safety sectors of the rotorcraft industry. The Valor team travels around the globe to bring you stories from the rotorcraft industry's first responders, with a special focus on the knowledge and technology that furthers their missions. Learn more at verticalmag.com/valor.
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Thank you for joining us for this enlightening episode of the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast and in partnership with Vertical Valor Magazine. Throughout our discussion, we've tackled the pressing challenges of funding in public safety aviation and explored effective solutions for acquiring aircraft and mission equipment. We also delved into the advancements in aviation technology, including the integration of CNC live systems, highlighting how these innovations improve operational efficiency for air crews. This episode is crucial for anyone engaged in public safety aviation, particularly those seeking funding strategies for new aircraft and mission equipment. If you found value in today's discussion, we encourage you to leave us a rating and review, as your feedback helps us continue to provide insightful content and reach a wider audience.